The cartel members of La Familia Michoacana gripped their weapons tightly, bracing for another bloody confrontation. But this time, it wasn't a rival gang standing across from them. On the other side of the soccer field stood a group of farmers, machetes and sickles in hand. They had endured years of extortion, threats, and fear, but not anymore. As the cartel raised their guns, the farmers didn't flinch. Instead, they charged, rage and years of indignity surging through them, determined to fight back with everything they had. It seems like the cartels are an unstoppable force, but sometimes people actually strike a victory against them. In today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're going to look at the times cartels messed with the wrong people, Part 2. La Familia Michoacana has some surprising origins. The cartel originally started as a vigilante group to combat drug trafficking and gangs in the state of Michoacan during the 1980s. However, this anti-drug group did a 180 and eventually became the producer of over half of the supply of methamphetamine entering the U.S. from Mexico each year, estimated to be around 100 tons. How did that happen? In a word, or rather a phrase, the war on drugs. The U.S. undertook a massive crackdown by strictly regulating over-the-counter sales of pseudoephedrine, one of the chief components of meth production, which created a giant gap in the market. So La Familia Michoacana, seeing an opportunity for big business, entered the meth trade, eventually becoming absorbed into the Gulf Organization. Today it operates mainly out of the mountainous areas of Sierra Madre del Sur. However, the cartel took a page out of the mafia's playbook and realized there was also big money to be made elsewhere. In extorting people, they started asking local businessmen in Michoacan for protection money. The businessmen reluctantly handed over the money, knowing full well that refusing could mean the end of their business, their families, and even their lives. Eventually, La Familia Michoacana got even greedier and started asking more people for protection money as well. They showed up on farms, guns in hand, and decided that they'd extort a fee from the farmers for every square meter planted. Once again, local farmers, scared and unsure what to do, coughed up what they could. Until 2023. That year, parts of Michoacan, including Tezcapilla, experienced more droughts and floods as well as higher temperatures than usual. This wrecked the harvest, leaving local farmers in a desperate position. Any hope of a good income that year disappeared along with their crops. But La Familia Michoacana was merciless. They wanted their money no matter what. Local farmers tried in vain to make them hear their plea and tried to renegotiate for a lower fee. They even held a meeting on December 7th with representatives from the cartel to plead their case. But the cartel members, not generally known for their empathy, were unmoved. Instead, the gang members told the local farmers to meet them on the local soccer field the next day. And knowing La Familia Michoacana's reputation, the locals knew that this argument wasn't going to be settled with a series of penalty kicks. The farmers showed up all right, but instead of carrying money, they got their hands on any weapons they could, including tools that they used around the farm. They gathered shotguns, machetes, sickles, and prepared to make their move. The group of farmers told La Familia Michoacana no more money. In return, the gang members started to fire into the crowd, but the rage of the locals had boiled over, and even gunfire wouldn't stop them at this point. The farmers ran at the cartel members, slicing and shooting whoever they could. The gang members, used to their reputation intimidating everyone around them, were caught off guard. In the end, the locals killed 10 cartel members, but 4 of their own were lost, and 7 others were wounded in the fierce clash. Unfortunately, the cartel took revenge the next day by kidnapping 14 people. 7 of them were found alive thanks to an anonymous call a month later. As for the farmers who killed the cartel members, while the Mexican state officially disapproves of vigilantism, prosecutors determined they were clearly acting in self-defense and refused to charge them. Reporters say the locals even managed to take out the leader of La Familia Michoacana, El Payaso, which ironically translates to the clown. Not exactly a nickname that you'd expect for one of Mexico's most feared cartel bosses. Speaking of embarrassing cartel leader nicknames, this next guy got exactly what was coming to him. Enter El Tequilero, or the tequila drinker, a cartel leader in the state of Guerrero. You might be imagining some guy swaggering into a bar, downing shots of tequila, showing his men how much liquor he can handle, and that image would be completely, totally wrong. Instead, El Tequilero, whose birth name was Jaibel Jacobo de El Monte, was frequently too drunk to function. People would hear him mumbling and slurring his words, and then he would almost always be followed by one of his henchmen, whose sole job was to prop El Tequilero up. Still, the nickname did nothing to diminish his feared reputation. As the leader of the Tequileros, he waged brutal turf wars against rival cartels, and it was often the innocent locals who found themselves caught in the deadly crossfire. Thanks to the town's strategic position at the base of mountains, where most of the region's opium poppies are grown, the Tequileros grew increasingly wealthy and powerful, tightening their grip on the drug trade. The area became so dangerous that many smaller towns around Totolapan were completely deserted, with locals fleeing their lifelong homes to escape the never-ending violence. No one in the region was safe, no one. In 2014, one of the most high-profile killings in the area was the local parish priest, Father Jose Acuña Ascension Osorio, whose body was thrown into the local river. But in early December 2016, the Tequileros went above and beyond their previous violent acts against the local residents. They targeted and kidnapped people with no known gang affiliation, either to extort money from them or because they suspected them of supporting a rival gang. Villagers were horrified at first, and that horror quickly turned into rage, especially for those who had family members taken. The wife of a construction engineer, Isauro de Paz Duque, was especially angry and decided that something needed to be done. So the locals had an idea. Following the anything you can do, I can do better philosophy, they decided to beat the cartel at their own game by kidnapping 24 of them and their family members. The Tequileros didn't know what hit them. A few dozen locals took to the streets of Totolapan not just with banners demanding justice against El Tequilero, but with shotguns and hunting rifles slung over their shoulders. They meant business. Soon after, a pair of videos surfaced online. In the first, a masked man declared that the people of Totolapan had had enough. The violence, the kidnapping, the fear, it would all end now. He announced the formation of a local self-defense force made up of ordinary citizens willing to take the fight to El Tequilero. But the second video had a surprising revelation. In it, Yadira Guillermo Garcia, the wife of the kidnapped engineer, stood before the camera, flanked by a few villagers, including an elderly woman. Instead of making a tearful plea for her husband's return, she decided to go another route. She informed El Tequilero that the local self-defense force had just kidnapped his mother, the elderly woman in the video. If El Tequilero wanted her back, he would have to return her husband. At this point, the state of Guerrero got wind of the quickly escalating situation in Totolapan and sent a negotiating team to the region, as well as 220 soldiers and police. The state said that they wanted to de-escalate the standoff, ensure the safety of the missing on both sides, and push for a peaceful resolution. And the negotiations worked up to a certain point. The self-defense group agreed to free 5 of the 24 people that they were holding, but they were absolutely not letting go of El Tequilero's mother. In fact, it seemed that they even managed to recruit her into their cause. In yet another video message, El Tequilero's mom, Maria Feliz de Amante, appeared on camera herself, telling the cartel boss to return the abducted engineer and that he would do the right thing, landing just shy of the classic, "I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed." And then again, she might have just been afraid for her life while kidnapped. In either case, El Tequilero didn't surface in public even for his mother's sake. But Isauro de la Paz Duque was safely returned, and shortly after, by December 15th, El Tequilero's mother was released to the police as well. 2 years later, police killed El Tequilero and 12 other cartel members, resulting in the disbanding of the Tequileros. But San Miguel Totolapan continues to experience high amounts of violence as other cartels have taken their place. There's not a lot of, and they all lived happily ever after endings in cartel stories, apparently. The government of Mexico continues to warn against vigilantism, which makes sense in some ways, as self-defense groups often become cartels themselves and then can result in even higher rates of violence. But people in the country, particularly in southern Mexico, see no other way out. Among those who have taken up arms are the indigenous Nahua people around Ayhualtempa in Guerrero. The local cartel the Nahua are up against are called Los Ardillos, or the Squirrels. Only 600 people live in Ayhualtempa, and since they're indigenous, they're more likely to be neglected by the Mexican state, which has often been accused of devoting more resources to whiter members of its population. So, of the 600 residents, 96 are all part of what they call a community guard. One of the strange things about this guard is that it also includes a dozen children. And we don't mean the "I'm 4 months away from my 18th birthday" children. The youngest armed guard in the village is 13-year-old Miguel. How is this even possible? Well, Mexican law does make one allowance for indigenous people. They're allowed to establish their own police forces. So, all indigenous children over the age of 12 are therefore allowed to own real guns. Economic opportunities on the ground were slim in Guerrero, so for decades many Nahua farmers grew poppy plants for the cartel to be used in heroin production. But by 2015, the farmers had had enough. They were tired of dealing with the local drug lords and increasingly afraid for their own lives as the narcos grew more and more violent against them. So they cut off all transactions with the group and they stopped growing the poppies altogether. Unfortunately, the cartel didn't go away. It actually just ramped up the violence in their communities. On January 17, 2020, Los Ardios killed 10 indigenous Nahua musicians who were coming back from a party. They abducted and executed men, women, and teenagers who ventured out of their mountain communities. Parents stopped sending their kids to school at 12 years old to train to join them in the CRAC, the regional coordinator of community authorities that makes up the Nahua Self-Defense Group. The local middle school students were also in Los Ardios territory, making them unsafe. In January of 2019, Los Ardios attempted to storm one of the villages and kidnap the locals. But CRAC, along with supporters, were ready. An alarm system went off throughout the village, warning of a cartel attack. Men, women, and children armed themselves and prepared to face off against the cartel members. Almost 200 people met the cartel on the local highway and the outskirts of their towns, warning them to back off. Los Ardios, ignoring the threat from the villagers, attacked anyway, resulting in a 3-hour shootout. The villagers defended their town with everything they had. When the dust settled, 20 members of Los Ardios lay dead, and the cartel itself had fled the scene. Though the Nahua and Guerrero continued to live in danger, at least they've managed to hold on to their homes. While many revenge operations lead to short-lived victories, there is one paramilitary group that managed to actually destroy a cartel operation and take down one of the most infamous drug lords of all time. Pablo Escobar messed with a lot of people. Though his legacy has somewhat been glorified through film and TV, his activities absolutely devastated the country for years. Anyone who opposed him or got in his way was eliminated. This resulted in thousands of dead people in Colombia alone, either directly killed by him or under his orders. Unfortunately, many of those targeted were judges and government officials who had refused to be corrupted, only to find themselves in Pablo's hit list. Pablo Escobar's lack of empathy knew no bounds. On November 27, 1989, he ordered the bombing of Avianca Flight 203, causing it to explode mid-air, just to assassinate presidential candidate Cesar Gaviria Trujillo. Gaviria wasn't even on it, as he canceled his flight plans. But Escobar had no problem dooming 107 souls, not to mention the 3 on the ground that had the unfortunate luck of having plane debris land on them. To this day, Colombia is still trying to heal from the scars of the drug trafficking operation that Escobar grew into a massive empire known as the Medellin Cartel. So how was he brought down? Most people know Escobar was shot, but what's far more interesting is how it all unraveled. How could one of the world's most feared criminals, who once commanded between 70,000 and 100,000 people, end up cornered and vulnerable? When it mattered most, Escobar only had a single bodyguard by his side. His inner circle had either vanished or been killed. And that is mostly due to a group known as Los Pepes, perseguidos por Pablo Escobar, which translates to people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. While at first glance that might seem like a motley crew of people who had friends or family members killed by the Medellin cartel, but the reality was a bit more complicated and dark. Los Pepes was put together and financed by Escobar's chief rival, the Cali cartel, but those were far from the only people involved. And the way they went about systematically dismantling Escobar's power was intense. Fidel Castano, a high-ranking member of the Cali cartel, was supposed to attend a meeting with Escobar along with 2 other Cali members, Fernando Galeano and Gerardo Moncada. The meeting would take place in Escobar's prison. Escobar did occasionally face the law, but he had so much power that he built his own luxurious jail called La Catedral and could pretty much do whatever he wanted to there. Castano, perhaps sensing something was off, decided to skip the meeting, and his intuition was right because Escobar decided to murder his 2 fellow cartel members, Galeano and Moncada. This annoyed Castano. He decided that this would be the end of Escobar, and nothing was going to stop his plan. So he founded Los Pepes. The Cali cartel member might originally have funded it, but it quickly became a tool for every group who had been trying, completely unsuccessfully, to take down Escobar for years. The CIA and the US government frequently relied on the intelligence Castano gathered, using it to guide their own operations. In some cases, they even collaborated directly with him, feeding Los Pepes critical information about Escobar's whereabouts. Castano established an office in Medellin and made it publicly known that he would accept any and all information about Escobar's activities from informants there. The Colombian government turned a blind eye to Los Pepes' activities and covertly helped them out of their pursuit of Escobar. And Los Pepes' activities got really violent. Rivaling Escobar himself, El Patron was known for his bomb attacks against his enemies. Los Pepes decided to fight fire with fire. They used information from police forces and the Colombian government to ramp up their own bomb attacks against anyone Escobar relied on. Collaborators, cartel members, lawyers, enforcers, even supporters and family members. Unfortunately, Los Pepes was so singularly focused on taking down Escobar that they didn't really care how many bystanders were taken out by their attacks, much like Escobar himself. But over time, their attacks worked to strangle the power of the Medellin cartel. Several of Escobar's top men were killed, with many others fleeing or joining other organizations in fear for their lives after seeing the writing on the wall. It wasn't just Los Pepes, it was Los Pepes with the support of the Cali Cartel and help from the DEA, CIA, US, and Colombian governments. Everyone was finally aligned against them, and now they wouldn't let legal hurdles stop them. They had a paramilitary group to do their dirty work for them, while officials and law enforcement agencies could pretend they didn't know anything about it. A U.S. Embassy report in February 1993 indicated close ties between Los Pepes and the Colombian police's task force. The report stated many of Los Pepes' attacks were like rogue policemen taking advantage of the rash of bombings to give Escobar a taste of his own medicine. People were tired of trying to use legal means and the justice system to bring Escobar to heel. Now they were just set on violent, bloody revenge. Los Pepes quickly got way too close to home for Escobar. They set off a car bomb that almost killed his children and resulted in his daughter, Manuela Escobar, becoming partially deaf. It was a strange, anxiety-inducing time for Escobar. He was experiencing a powerful organization taking him out little by little using, well, the exact same tactics that he had used to rise to power. For months, he remained on the run, losing followers and supporters left and right. He never stayed in one place more than 2 nights, knowing police forces in Los Pepes were hot on his heels. He often had to get around in the trunks of taxis to avoid detection, a far cry from the private jets he was accustomed to. On December 2, 1993, Pablo Escobar was holed up in a modest apartment in Los Olivos, a middle-class neighborhood in Medellin. With only his last remaining bodyguard by his side, he was running out of time and options. Needing to reach out to his family, he made a 2-minute phone call to his son, Juan Pablo Escobar. 2 minutes was exactly how long Colombian intelligence needed to track down Escobar's location. Immediately, the search block of the police force was on the move. They sped to Escobar's apartment and barged in. Escobar ran up to the rooftop and tried to escape by running across the roofs of the neighborhood. However, there were too many men on his tail and not nearly enough with him. The police shot his legs, torso, and head, eventually taking down Escobar, who fell to the ground. Though Los Pepes was not at the scene of the crime, they did take credit for the killing of Escobar. And in a way, they were right. They had reduced Escobar to such a low position, decimated his organization, and removed all of his protection to the point that he became an incredibly easy target for police. Check out Undercover Agent Who Spent 24 Months in a Mexican Cartel, or this other video on the drug trade right here.